Welcome to the Northern Powerhouse session at MIPIM. Our thanks to Capita Real Estate for sponsoring this afternoon's event, and our thanks to Manchester at MIPIM for hosting us. Our panellists this afternoon are Sir Richard Leese, the leader of the City of Manchester, Councillor Judith Blake, the leader of the City of Leeds, Steve Rotherham, the Metro Mayor of the Liverpool City Region, Pat Ritchie, the Chief Executive of Newcastle City Council, John Mothersole, the Chief Executive of Sheffield City Council, and Deborah McLaughlin, Managing Director for Real Estate Projects at Capita Real Estate. Please give our esteemed panel a warm welcome. So we're here to talk about the North. We're talking about the Northern Powerhouse, and we're focusing now on the whole idea of the essence of Northern lifestyle. What's it like to live in the North, to dwell in the North, to be brought up in the North? What's the DNA of the North of England? How does its biography shape the people who live there? How does its story tell us something about its future? And how do we attract more people to share in the amazing adventure of living in the North? The way we're going to do it is that I'm going to ask each of the panellists to share some initial thoughts on the question of what's the essence of Northern living and how do we use it to drive success. And then we're going to open it up for a debate and a discussion. I'll invite all of you to participate, so please be ready when the time comes. And we'll try to develop some understanding of what we can do in the future to really sell Northern living and Northern lifestyle. Thanks very much to everyone who's here. Let's get the panel started. Deborah, you're going to go first. We want to know what you think is the essence of Northern living and how can we use it to drive success?
Thank you, thank you. Well, the North isn't just one thing, so lots of my colleagues in the South go, "Are you from the North?" as if it's one thing. The North is an amazing array of cities, of communities, and it has a diverse range of sectors, brilliant football, music, and a marvellous lifestyle, coast, countryside, everything that you could ask for. So it isn't just a thing, really, and it's a very attractive place for lots of people who want to live. And we are better and better about articulating our offer as the North to be able to attract investment, to build infrastructure. We'll be getting better and better at collaborating between cities, driving growth, driving prosperity. And I think because of necessity originally, we are better at working collaboratively in partnership with public and private sector. And sometimes that is difficult, sometimes it takes time to establish, but everyone benefits when we're able to collaborate. And so that's what makes the North great for me.
So the North is a place where collaboration can really happen. Great, thank you very much indeed. Judith, we're asking you to go next. Please give us your reflections.
So a little bit of personal history from me. I grew up in Leeds. And when I got to be 17, 18, the first thing in my life was how I could get as far away from Leeds as possible. And I think that's quite a normal response. So I actually went to university down in Kent. And I can remember sitting, those of you who know the campus in Canterbury, sitting on the hill, looking down, thinking, what on earth do people do down here? And of course, the irony was that everyone who came from the southeast went home for the weekend. So everyone I knew at Kent University came from the north. And it took me a while to get back home. And I think just really thinking about today, it's about, I think we're all really in a sort of Brexit landscape, trying to get a hold of identity and what, the whole issue of place and what it means. But for me, as leader of Leeds, the really great thing that we've achieved, and since it was happening before I became leader, is that, particularly the 5 core cities in the North have been working together in a way that I think a few years ago we would, not have thought possible. And there is still, and in Yorkshire in particular, you get this from, I have to say, ministers in London who just say, oh, well, they can never get on with each other. They're always falling out. But actually, do you know what? I think we've opened that magic box where we realise that we have something unique and special that people do understand. We might not be able to define it absolutely, but actually, when we pool our resources, come together and look at the challenges facing us, we are beginning to make a real difference. But, I think, we can talk about infrastructure, we can talk about the skills agenda, all of those things. But I think it is about the whole issue of character and how we actually tell the world about the great things we do. So the Yorkshire experience, a really big breakthrough, was holding the grand départ of the Tour de France, that has now become the Tour de Yorkshire, that one of the most serious cycle races in the world now. And it is that incredible ability to come together through culture, through sport, and really express how proud we are of where we come from, but also how ambitious we are for our future, and working together to achieve it is actually one of the most solid things I think we have at the moment.
Judith, thank you very much indeed. You said depth of character, the ability to make a difference, using culture and sport to host the world. Sounds good. Northern lifestyle. Steve?
Well, I'm not sure what a northern lifestyle is, if I'm absolutely honest. As you'll probably be able to tell, or you won't be able to tell, but I'm a Scouser born and bred. There's hardly discernible Scouse accent somewhere there. 7 years in Westminster, that has knocked all the edges off. But I don't think it's about losing our individual identities. I do think that there's, Mancunians and people from Leeds and people from Liverpool are very precious of their cultural heritage. So it's not about that. So what is a northern lifestyle? If it's about us working more collaboratively and trying to see whether there are benefits of agglomeration, then I'm absolutely certain that that's what we're currently doing. That's on the path that we're on. I'll give you an example of how that can work, and it's when there was an announcement from central government about Crossrail 2 and the fact that it looked as if the government had gone cold on what we call Crossrail for the North, Northern Powerhouse Rail. It used to be called HS3, whatever you want to call it, but connectivity west to east rather than north to south. And when they did that, the northern leaders, all of us, got together, myself and Andy Burnham as the two Metro mayors of Greater Manchester and the Liverpool City region. And it was through that voice that we were able to pressurise the government to say this can't be an either or. It can't be London and the South East benefiting over the North. If there are two cheques, that's fine. But if there's only one cheque for £15 billion, that has to be for our project first, and then the South at a later date can get their Crossrail 2 project. So if it is about us working better, speaking with a clear voice but with many accents, if it is about us joining up and seeing what the complementarity of city regions is, then I'm fine with that. But I don't think it's about any of us losing any individual identity.
Great, thank you very much. So a clear voice with many accents, complementarity, standing up for yourselves and each other seems to be part of what you were saying as well, and not being prepared to be bullied is part of the story, Steve, from what I've heard you say. Yeah.
Scouse straight, we'll stand up for ourselves, thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Pat, what do you think?
Well, I'm also from the north, and and actually I was in Edinburgh recently, and somebody said to me, "How are things down south?" And it took me a while to realise they meant Newcastle. So I think, but there's a serious point in there. I think there is a lot of common ground between the north of England and Scotland, and a lot of similar traits. And one of the big things I think we need to think about is how we kind of capitalise on that collaboration, as well as the collaboration across the northern cities that Judith and others have talked about. I mean, if you think about the north, a lot of people also say to me, Newcastle, I studied there, my kids studied there. It's a great place for an education, lots of great universities, lots of young people come to our cities. They love the lifestyle, they love the sort of edginess. One of the big challenges for us, I think, is how do we retain that? How do we keep people that come to the northern cities and really help them drive change and innovation in our cities? How do we attract more people? And it seems to me the north has always been about the future and about change and about innovation, and somehow I think we need to capitalise on that and talk about the North as a great place to come and live and build your business as a young person, and really kind of retain some of the strengths and the fondness that people have for the North when they've come to live or work or study there. And we've done a lot of work, I think, collaboratively to look at how we do that. And that's a challenge, I think, for real estate and for housing, to try and ensure that we really think about what the future housing will look like for our future generations. We really need to think about what sort of investment we do in the development of our cities to really look at future tech businesses, future places where people want to live that are fair, that are decent, that are clean, green and easy to move around in. And I think the North has to be at the forefront of that thinking.
Great, Pat, thank you very much indeed. So it's full of great universities. It's about the future, and the North has always been about innovation, and it's about fun and edginess. A quick vote in the room. How many people think that we should do more to retain graduate talent in the North? If you think we should, raise your hands. Okay, if you think we shouldn't, raise your hands. Pat, you've got a team behind you there when you're ready to take that initiative. John, what do you think?
So I've lived in Manchester, Liverpool, Sheffield and Newcastle and also London, so I'll make it to Leeds one day. So I think that any lifestyle is a balance between options and compromises. And I think there's a sort of fundamental practical thing about the North is actually there are more options and less compromises. Whether it's a value proposition, whether it's just the choices, whether it's the connectivity, which needs to be better, but actually ain't that bad just at the moment. But I've lived in those cities. I think there's something, they're all different, and I'd go back to any one of those cities. But the northern cities, there's something about authenticity and independence that comes through loud and clear. And I actually think that the moment of authenticity and independence is now. In a world of digitisation and commoditisation, there's a real value on the authentic lifestyle and the independent vibe, whether it's in the invention or the manufacturing or the gin distillers, whatever it is, it all adds up to a certain feeling that comes through the North. And for me, there's something quite endearing that we can sell. The North is a place where actually authenticity tackles hyperbole. But one of the challenges, it's also where understatement tackles ego as well. And one of the challenges we have is how do you actually sell a place that loves valuing understatement? And I mentioned this to a colleague from Arrett once about my city of Sheffield, sort of a very modest city in its attitude. I said, how do you sell a city of modesty? And he says, well, you sell it to modest people. And he listed all the successful people that we will have heard of who essentially are amazingly modest. So maybe there's something in that authentic, independent, challenge and big ego that we need to celebrate and sell.
Thank you very much, John. Lots of heads are nodding, actually, as you speak. You said there that there are many more options than there are sort of cons and compromises. You said it's about authenticity, and it's about putting, it's about the modesty and about understatement and how you put those things together. And a very interesting question about how do you promote something that is both diverse, authentic, and also modest at the same time. So, Richard, what are your thoughts?
Well, we're certainly not talking about loss of identity, and Steve talked about comparison between Liverpool and Manchester. I can go more local than that. We've got representatives from Bolton and Rochdale in the delegation. They've got different accents, they've got different strengths, they're very, very different places, although if I go to my local shopping street, if I'm in the chemist, I'm in Manchester. If I walk up the road to the optician, I'm in Salford. And again, very, very different characteristics. So it is about maintaining different identities. And I say that's somebody who comes from Mansfield. I'm an immigrant to Manchester, like so many other Mancunians. Mansfield, by the way, always counted itself as being in the north, not the East Midlands. We were north of the Trent, and that, as far as we were concerned, was the north. So we think of ourselves as a northerner, but I'm now very much, like most immigrants, I'm very much a Mancunian nowadays. One of the things we have in common is we're all very, very close together. The cities of the north are very, very close. And if you draw a line from Liverpool across to Sheffield, up to Newcastle and back down, which of course contains Manchester and Leeds and Bradford and a whole range of other places within that triangle. That's smaller than Beijing. That whole, what we think is quite a large area, is actually quite a small area in reality. And so we can think of ourselves as a virtual city of 10 million people. And I think that's what really Northern Powerhouse is about, is being able to see ourselves in that sort of way without a loss of identity. And if I can translate that into some of the things we would do in terms of promoting Manchester nationally and internationally. So taking a particularly Manchester-centric view of the world, but I'm not going to, for the minute, talk about anything about the wonderful things we have in the city itself. So I'm just going to put that on one side and assume we know about all the wonderful things in the city of Manchester itself. Then I'll say we've got some wonderful countryside. We've got the Yorkshire Dales, and we've got the Peak District, and we've got the Lake District, and we've got Snowdonia. And we have got some fantastic coastline. We've got the Dee Estuary, we've got Formby, we've got all of that. We've got some historic cities. We've got York, we've got Chester. Now, for our purposes, all of those are actually part of what Manchester has to offer. We will talk about a catchment area of 7 million people. Well, even Greater Manchester's only got a population of 2.8 million. Those other 4.2 come from somewhere else. They're within that travel area. We will talk about 100,000 graduates every year. Although we've got some big universities in Manchester, we don't have 100,000 graduates every year. We are counting Huddersfield and Liverpool and Lancaster and a whole range of other places that are within easy travel area. Now, the whole point about Northern Powerhouse is that as well as adopting that broader view of the north of England, we're quite welcome for other parts of the north to share our assets as well. This is a two-way process. It's a two-way process that creates the scale that makes us from being a collection of sort of medium-sized cities on a global stage to being a place that has the scale to balance any other global city anywhere else in the world. That's what Northern Powerhouse does for us, and it only works when all of the northern cities and their surrounding towns are part of it. It doesn't work otherwise.
Yes, Richard, thank you very much. I think I remember discussing with you and colleagues a few years ago, we worked out that the north, as you're describing it, the big agglomeration's got more universities than Paris, more jobs than New York, and more technology companies than London, when you look at it that way. So very, very interesting. You talked about the combined scale, complementary assets, and some of the common features as well. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gents, there's a lot of you at the back who are paying attention nicely, but you might be uncomfortable. Just to tell you, there are not many seats here, but there's a lot of space over to my right. And if you want to come down and stand a bit closer to the speakers, you're very welcome to do so. We don't want anybody feeling they're on the margins here. There is more space down at the front. Panellists, may I put 2 or 3 questions and ask you just to pick one each, and then we'll get straight to our audience. So one question is really about Brexit. Let's deal with that on some level. What does Brexit really mean in terms of this promotion of the North and its diverse lifestyle and appeal that people have been talking about? That would be one. A second question might be around this whole idea of retaining more talent. What do we need to do if we want to retain more of the graduate talent in the North? And maybe the third question would be around housing. Is there an issue to do with housing in the North, its diversity, its range, its appeal, the choices that people have? And if so, what is the issue and what needs to be done? If each of you would mind just taking one of those for a comment, then we'll build the conversation from there. So, Sir Richard, why don't you begin, and we'll come back down this way.
Well, I'll take the last one if I can. I'll take housing, and I think there are a range of issues around housing. There are parts of the north of England that have too much old stock that is not of sufficient quality. It needs either replacing or refurbishing. Refurbishment is always ought to be the first choice if you can do that. But we do need to have a lot of improvement of the existing stock. Certainly we don't have a sufficient range of stock across the north of England, and by that I mean a range of tenures and a range of price points as well. That we need everything from very affordable housing for low-income families right through to executive housing. If we want companies and if we want inward investment and so on, then we have to have places for the people who are going to run those companies to live. So we need more housing, but we also need more housing to be developed in a way that creates places. I'm going to be critical of a section of the property industry now, perhaps a bit dangerous in a place like this, but basically too much of volume house builders are about building estates and moving on. It doesn't create any sense of place, there is no sense of ownership. Is that we need housing that is really about what happens once the houses are being built and people are living in it. It's as much about the schools, the shops, the other service, the other amenities, parks, libraries and everything else. So we need to develop a housing offer that is about building places, and that really requires not simply developers coming and doing something and going away. It requires a sort of collaboration between councils, developers and a whole range of other people to do that placemaking. I think we're pretty good at doing that in Manchester. But there are a large number of places around the north of England that struggle in doing that. And the last thing I'm going to add, and particularly for a lot of our what are currently peripheral towns and so on, is that they need investment, they need government support in order to be able to do that. And actually, if we want to build the north I've been talking about, is a lot of places really need that investment and they need it at scale.
Great, Sir Richard, thank you very much indeed. Judith.
So if I could take the Brexit question, huge area for discussion. But if you actually look at the voting patterns, the cities in the main voted just, I have to say, Leeds was actually just about a 50-50, but slightly in favour of remaining in Europe. But you know, around each of our great cities, there are many towns, many communities where the vote to leave Europe was high and significant. And I think moving forward, to really capture exactly what we need to do in the north, we must take account of the way that people are feeling in those smaller communities and make sure that whatever we do going forward, whilst the cities are catalysts of growth, we must make sure that we include our regions as well. So all of the issue about connectivity, it's not just about connecting the cities, important as that is, it's about, you know, HS2 coming to Leeds and then, you know, using all of the development around Leeds stations to really open up the connections to the towns around in the Leeds City region, but also going up north towards Newcastle and up into Scotland. I think the really important aspect of everything we're trying to do now is talking about inclusive growth, and it's about looking at growth, about investment in terms of how it will benefit the people, the communities that are actually there. So talking about opening business, attracting business, absolutely. But alongside that, you know, do they have the homes that they can afford to live in? Do they have the schools? Do they have the health facilities? Do the young people in all of our communities across the north have the skills that they need to take advantage of the incredible developments that are taking place? And I think the really important debate, and the core cities have tried to engage with government on this and really have not succeeded, is that actually when the money comes back from Europe and is repatriated, the money that currently goes directly into some of our areas of highest deprivation, we really cannot allow it just to go back into Whitehall to be redistributed from London. We need to have that real attractive, direct route of getting money through devolution into our community so that we can make the most appropriate decisions for attracting investment and allowing growth to occur that brings benefit to the widest number of people who live in the immediate area.
Judith, thank you very much indeed. Let's just see how the room thinks about this question. So one of the things that Judith has said is that our response to Brexit must in part be that the monies that are repatriated must be invested in the productive economy in the north. I guess I'm on a loser here, but who thinks that's correct? Who agrees with that? Okay, anybody disagree with that? Okay, so that's all agreed. Sir Richard said, part of the challenge is that in certain parts of the north, we don't have the housing supply that we need for the economy that we're trying to build. I think that would be fair to say. Who agrees with that? Okay, who doesn't agree with that statement? Don't be shy. Richard's known for being a Democrat. Okay, so... I like that sort of vote. Yeah. Okay, so this is Cuban-style voting we've got. Steve, your reflections on one of the questions.
Okay, well, just to say I associate myself with everything that was said from both Richard and Judith, but just to add on Brexit, there needs to be a differential settlement, whatever comes out of Brexit, for the North, and we need a voice for the North at the Brexit negotiations. And if you think that Scotland have got one, but so have Wales and Northern Ireland, and I think the Cayman Islands have got one, and all sorts of I think the Isle of Man have got one. And so the North, with up to 16 million people, if you go right the way across to Hull, we need a voice as well at that.
Who should be that voice?
Well, that's not for me to... I mean, ask these. If I suggest something, they'll all vote for it anyway, because no one's different from the viewpoints that were put forward. But there does need to be somebody who can speak up for what we need to achieve in the north, rather than the south and the southeast getting the ear of the Prime Minister and then that becoming policy. Look, the financial sector is really important to us all, to UK PLC. I'm not decrying that, but that is different than the needs of what we need for the north. And I do think that we perhaps, if we have this convention of the north, or this gathering of northern leaders, then it'll be for that group. And it's not just northern political leaders, it's business leaders as well. But perhaps something might come out of those discussions where, you know, somebody goes and speaks on our behalf. We've met, myself and Andy Burnham and Ben Houchin, who's the Metro Mayor of Tees Valley. So we have met with David Davis, but that dialogue needs to be ongoing. And as I say, you know, they can't just impose things from the centre and hope that we'll just agree and be thankful for the crumbs off the table again. Well, yeah, we need a common voice.
Yeah. Steve, thank you very much indeed. So we've had 2 comments on Brexit and we've had 1 on housing. We've still got graduate retention and any more comments on the first 2. Pat, where are you going to go?
Yeah, well, I'll have a go at graduate retention because I think everybody in the room supported the need to think about that. And it seems to me that we need to really understand, with those who come to study, what is it that kind of makes them decide that they're not going to stay in the place where they studied. I would suggest it's largely around access to jobs and a kind of clear career progression. And we can offer that in the north if we're better connected, if we kind of sell the north differently to graduates. And there is some work for me to be done around how you build your career in the north, because the other side of staying in the north where you've studied is you get a much better quality of life that you've enjoyed while you were studying. There's better access to housing, it's easier to move around. So there's something around how you actually, we do much more proactively with our universities to sell the north. And I do think we have the mix of housing, if I can link the two together, the mix of housing is a really important thing for cities in terms of the way we retain graduates. And the cost of housing still is competitive compared with London, where the southeast, where other people go, where people go to maybe follow their career. So that's a big selling point. But we do need to think, I think, in a world where maybe less young people are going to own their own home. What's our different offer across the north? How do we really sort of think about housing in a world where maybe folk are less worried about about owning their own home and want a different offer that maybe isn't the traditional social housing offer. Is it private rent? It's maybe somewhere in between. And I think if we can start to articulate that, link that to you can build your career here and you can have a place where you enjoy living and a good quality, then there's something about a real campaign around Northern graduate retention that we could start to build. Starting point, though, we should ask them.
Great, Pat, thank you very much indeed. John?
So the final and answered question is just gone, hasn't it? So I'm going to be treading similar territory. I'm going to go for graduate retention. And I think it's connectivity. We're blessed with a cohort of graduates every year, in the hundreds of thousands who want to stay. And actually we're blessed with the cohort who try to stay. And indeed they do stay, but at some point in their career, either because they can't get the real option of the next job or they believe it's not there, they go. Or some go. I think actually the migration is somewhat overstated in terms of the data, but it is a feature. So I think connectivity, I think if we can develop, you just take Sheffield, Manchester, Leeds, the outputs from Northern Powerhouse Rail is 4 trains an hour, so one every 15 minutes, 30-minute maximum journey time. Once you get to that frequency, you can throw the timetable away and people can live their economic life in that labour market. And all the evidence from Europe says if you connect up cities, you actually grow the economy. So it's not just about Sheffield graduates being able to work in Manchester, it's about the overall market growing for that talent. So I would focus on connectivity, but I wouldn't exclude digital as well, because I think increasingly people are going to live their work life in parallel with their lifestyle, and they will continue to work very hard, but they will apply flexibility to how they work. And I think a lot more into lifestyle with flexible work style, and we have to facilitate that as well.
Great, John, thank you very much. As you were speaking, people were nodding. And a lot of what you say chimes with Richard's earlier point about the combined scale of the economy and using that to build the labour market opportunities. Deborah, take your pick. What are you going to comment on?
I'd like an observation on talent, if I may, and then talk about housing. And the observation about talent is that we're a national employer, but we employ 22,000 people in the Northern Powerhouse footprint, so a large employer. And what we're doing is positively creating graduate and apprenticeship opportunities in North. It makes good sense for us as a business, and also it's creating jobs in places that will benefit from them. And interestingly, the last round of graduates that joined us in the Manchester office were all returning graduates, so graduates that came from Manchester area, went away to university and have chosen after a couple of years away from Manchester to come back because they want the lifestyle and they want the culture and the very vibrant nightlife that you can get in Manchester. So that was an interesting observation that is true to life. For me in housing, we're still building houses the way we built them hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and we keep saying, what's the silver bullet? Well, the silver bullet can't be continue to build houses the way we've built them hundreds of years ago. And if we start thinking about our children and our children's children and how they might want to occupy houses, I don't imagine we'll have getting up to switch a light, switch off. Everything will be automated. We'll embrace prop tech, we'll embrace artificial intelligence. And that might be the way to accelerate delivery, because the traditional way of building is so much slower and it's a limited numbers of skill sets. Whereas if we can automate some of that and really increase the numbers, we're starting to see it in modern methods of construction, but it's a bit like build to rent. It's such a long time coming, and then finally once people embrace it, you'll start seeing a lot of delivery. But I just think wondering and thinking about how people might want to choose to occupy the house, the flexibility between digital connectivity to work and home, and it sort of fudges what the workplace and the home place looks like. And I think we should be starting in that place and looking at end users of housing in 20, 30 years plus that might give us a solution to certainly helping the housing crisis, if not solving it.
Great, Deborah, thank you very much. We're going to open this up for your questions and contributions in a moment. Firstly, a couple of quick votes. So the panellists have been talking a lot about the diverse northern lifestyles and the importance of lifestyle and character as a draw. The question is, do you think we're optimising the lifestyle proposition in the way we promote the North? If you think we are, please raise your hands. If you think we're not, please raise your hands. Okay, so there's a gap here, it seems. Do you think that we need a northern seat at the Brexit table? If you do think we need that, please raise your hands. If you don't think we need that, please raise your hands. Okay, now you've got 3 options. Okay, one person said you don't think you need it. Please get the microphone when the time comes. So your choices are, it can be a minister, it can be a local government leader, or it can be a business person representing the North. I know that's not the total choice, but just for the moment, who thinks it should be a minister? Thank you very much, sir. You're welcome. Who thinks it should be a local government leader? Okay. Who thinks it should be a business person? Okay, it's about 50-50 on the business person and the local government leader there, as far as I can tell it. Who wants to ask a question or make a point? Richard?
What about none of the above?
Okay. Who would like none of the above? and what sort of person would you like, Richard?
I think I slightly disagree with the notion that it needs to be an individual person. I think actually it needs to be a combination of business and local government.
Right. Who's in favour of business and local government together representing the North? There you go. We've got 250s make 100. Once again, that's what leadership is, isn't it, you see? Questions, comments and thoughts for the panel. You can either ask a question to an individual panel member or ask a general question, and we'll ask them to take the questions as they see fit. This is your chance. Please raise your hands and get the microphone. Yes, sir. So Rich has got the microphone. He'll bring it down. We'd like to take as many as we can at once. So please be ready to come in with further questions.
Hello. Oh, okay. My name's Tim Neri. I'm actually from Teesside, who seem to be eternally absent from MIPIM, but there you go.
But you're here.
Yeah, thank you. Question is about HS2. The country seems to think that we can only build that in a northerly direction. Why have we not been shouting a little louder about, delivering the northern ends earlier, particularly the Leeds to Birmingham leg?
Okay, very good. HS2, there's a question over there from Richard McCarthy. Richard, before you arrived, we said thank you to Capita for sponsoring this event. So thank you again.
It's a pleasure. Yeah. So I was going to also comment and ask for a comment on the on high-speed rail, but actually I want to connect it to what I think actually the east-west connections. There's already been comment about this. Why aren't you making more fuss about east-west and actually saying maybe that should come before north-south?
Great. Thank you very much. There's a nice, sharp question. There's a gentleman back there. If you keep your hand up, sir. By the way, we do like to get questions from women and men. And so don't be shy, ladies. We want you in the conversation.
Andrew Latchmore, good afternoon. I'd like to congratulate the leaders of the Northern Powerhouse authorities on forming Transport for the North and coming up with a proper strategic plan for prioritising expenditure. What I'd like to know is what you can do and think we should be doing to persuade government to give that transport plan the teeth that Transport for London has, so that we can actually start to deliver some of that infrastructure and not merely hope that one day government will feel fit to afford us some funds.
Great. How can we give Transport for the North more teeth? What's the argument that needs to be put to win that? Who's waiting to come in? We've got Ewan here. Anybody else waiting? Please. Thank you, Rich.
Yeah, great to hear ideas around connectivity and culture to attract people to the North, but is that enough? Does there need to be something perhaps economic differentially to the South, such as stamp duty or differential tax rates or visa policy post-Brexit that might encourage things more than just some of those perhaps softer things that have been raised today?
Great. So what part should incentives play, whether it's immigration incentives, visas, tax incentives of various kinds? Anybody else waiting? Yes, madam. Thank you. Microphone's on its way. What we'll do, panel, is we're going to ask you just to take 2 questions each, so you don't have to answer all of them. Yes, please.
Hi, Susan Witterick from DBX Acoustics. My question is, we obviously need more housing stock, but are we building the right type of housing? We seem to be building a lot of single occupancy, dual occupancy flats, rabbit hutches, but not so many affordable family homes, and I think that's needed as well if you want to keep people in the region in the long term.
Great. How many people in the room are concerned in the same way that that question suggests, that we may be building too many apartments and not enough family homes? If you agree with that concern, raise your hands. Okay, if you disagree with that concern, raise your hands. Also, house builders are allowed to vote. That's okay. Right, good. So most people agree with that concern. Some do not. Anybody else waiting? No? Okay, well, let's take them. So we've got 5 questions. HS2, couldn't we have the northern end of this a bit sooner? What can you do about that? The east-west rail link, why aren't you promoting that more sharply? How do we make sure that transport for the north gets more teeth? What's the argument that needs to be made there? What about some differential incentives for the north? Visas, tax incentives and other things. And then are we building the right type of housing? I'm going to take 2 questions each. Pat, will you start?
I'll start with housing. I think you have to see housing across wider than just the city centre and think about a plan across a broader city region and you know, different types of houses, different parts of that plan. But importantly, think about connectivity. The big thing is choice, and having choice which is accessible to jobs and ways in which you develop that. And I think we're all of us in different ways looking at that kind of broader approach to reflect different people's choices. In terms of transport, I think one of the most important things from a kind of Newcastle point of view is the connectivity across the East Coast main line. And there's something for me about, and we've been doing some work with Leeds and with York and Edinburgh, about ensuring that the East Coast main line is HS2 ready. And that means investment in the East Coast main line now, so that there is then the ability to run the faster trains up through Newcastle and towards Edinburgh from Leeds. And if we do that, there are benefits now to the travelling public on the East Coast main line as we speak. It's partly a benefit in the shorter term, but also means that we're fit for purpose for the longer term. And there's a lot of kind of common ground being developed, particularly with the Scottish authorities, around how we might mount more of a campaign around that.
Great, Pat, thank you very much. Steve, will you pick up 2 points?
Yeah, I'll join in on the debate around HS2 and West-East connectivity because actually all of that should be happening at the same time. That's my belief, and I agree with the question that was predicated on the fact that if it had been started here first, it could have done the exact same thing in the same timescale that the government have outlined it, but we would have been guaranteed, and people would have genuinely believed that it will end up. Sorry, when I say here, I meant in our part, in the north. Sometime, yeah, I forgot where it was then. Yeah, but if the spade in the ground had started in Manchester, for instance, I would have had more confidence that it will end up being a complete line. The first part of it to the West Midlands is done and dusted. I was a Member of Parliament when we went through the hybrid bill, and I agreed with it. My contention has always been that will we see the completion of the line in the timescale, because the funding envelope is £56 billion and it seems to be creeping south of north of what that might be, and whether then the government continue to fund it to the same degree. So it would be better, I think, if they started to look at West-East connectivity as part of HS2. And by the way, West-East connectivity is not high speed. It's not meant to be high speed, but it is about quicker times, but it's also about capacity. We need the capacity across the country. If they did both at the same time, they'd save money. Already, we, through Northern leaders and through, I'd have to say myself and Andy Burnham, tackling the government very early doors when it seemed that they were going cold on the idea of connecting the things up. We've got passive provision for 2 link points, touch points on HS2, which will provide us with the ability in the future to connect up to Liverpool, and then from Liverpool to Manchester Airport, Manchester City Centre at Piccadilly, and I'm sure Richard will want to explain to people that that needs to be a through station and not a turnaround facility. And again, we're supporting each other, because then that links again across country to Leeds and right the way across the whole. All of this can be done, and perhaps because there is huge capacity within HS2, some of the experts about pulling these projects together, which are very, very complex, they should be helping with Northern Powerhouse Rail to do these things so you can get some coterminosity.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Deborah, will you pick up 2 points?
Yeah, I'll start with housing and apartments. You know, there's nothing wrong with apartments per se. It's a great option for people. It is important, of course, to get the quality right and to build them so that they've got a good, strong, resilient future. But in the scheme of things, new build is what, 150,000 a year, 200? It's a tiny, tiny proportion of the housing stock that we've got anyway. And one of the advantages of apartments is they tend to be in town centres, which is really important to increase the density. So many years ago, the cities that we're all talking about had very few people living in the city centre. They were quiet at night. After 5 o'clock, people disappeared. Now that we've started to see the apartment market thriving in city centres, we see a greater vibrancy. So it's about appropriateness. You wouldn't necessarily want to put apartments in some locations, but the part of the jigsaw and other parts of the jigsaw might be garden villages, creating brand new settlements. And again, you wouldn't fill that with apartments necessarily, but you would make sure that they are created in a way that follows garden village principles that are high quality and the placemaking. So I think, you know, it's sort of horses for courses, but apartments in themselves are part of our solution and do generate wealth and give younger people particularly an opportunity to move into cities.
Are you also saying that there is a challenge around the supply of family housing? So you're saying apartments good,
yeah.
You need them, but what about the family housing?
Absolutely. There's a challenge across all sectors of the housing market. The government themselves talk about a housing crisis and a broken housing market. So yeah, of course we need to increase family housing, but you know, family housing doesn't necessarily have to be the traditional model that we all think about. If you look at Europe, if you look at the States, they don't all have a front garden, back garden and a garage to fill with rubbish. They tend to look at different ways. And so, you know, we can look to other places for some of the solutions for the housing market. On transport, I entirely agree with increased connectivity. I'm not close enough to the detail, but why can't we just start them at both ends and do it quicker?
Absolutely.
So it's there in my lifetime before we all retire.
Yeah. Be very helpful, wouldn't it? John?
Yeah, I'll just start with housing, if I may. I think the apartment question was also linked to affordable housing as well. And I think the challenge on affordable housing in the north is that in too many places, housing in the north is marginally viable. And I think it's a great example, just like transport example, of national policies designed with the southeast in mind that somehow don't work in the north, and they shy away from the real challenge, which is public investment in affordable housing. If I can link that to the question about the teeth for transport, I wonder whether there's insufficient northern consequence felt by government when policies are introduced that actually don't quite maximise the opportunity we believe we represent. And having worked in London, as many will have done in this room, you know, there's a much more direct, angry consequence if policies drift away from what they want. So I'm a fan of incentives. There was an incentive question out there as well. I am a fan of incentives. It makes, you know, our lives easier. I'm cautious about building an economy built on incentive. And if I was given the choice between a policy shift that recognised our opportunities or an incentive shift, I'd go for the policy shift all the time, because when the incentives have run out, they've gone, but the policy is usually here forever.
Very interesting point. And of course, a lot of people say, John, that, you know, incentives in a sense are a marketing tool, not really a financial tool.
Yeah.
And you need to make sure that they've got a sunset clause in them and everything else. It's the quality in the end that counts, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sir Richard, your reflections.
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about housing and a little bit about transport as well. But I was struck by the rabbit hutch comment in the question about housing. Something that Deborah's touched on is that most housing is already there and most of it isn't in city centres. But I'm going to talk a little bit about city centre housing. That in Manchester city centre, 25 years ago it's 500 people, now it's 35,000 people. That's a big change. However, it's still round about 7% of the population of the city of Manchester, even when it's grown to that sort of level. But there has been a change. City centre communities in Manchester now are becoming mature communities. Castlefield is now a mature community, a mature area. Actually, city centre living is becoming normal rather than something that is unusual, and with that comes a whole range of new demands. So one of the demands that comes from city centre councils now is about school places. People are having families in the city centre. That's a real positive thing. So yes, it's a small part of the housing market, but a very important part, and it's one that's changing. Living in apartments again in Manchester is becoming a normal thing to do. It's not a thing you just do for a couple of years now. It's a lifestyle choice where when people have families, they don't want to move out into some boring suburb. They want to stay in the city centre with the lifestyle that the city centre brings. We do things to help. Two things. Manchester, our residential quality guidelines, which were drawn up with the industry, I think are the most demanding certainly in England, and that includes both space standards and environmental standards, so our apartments aren't rabbit hutches, because we won't allow rabbit hutches to be built in Manchester. The second thing is that we do put a restriction on in any development about how many can be one bed. We do require 2-bed and 3-bed and even bigger apartments as well. Although I have to say that certainly those that are within the PRS sector, it's always the 1-beds that let first. So there is a real demand issue within this as well about what people want. But if over time we want to build more mixed communities, we have to continue to require those bigger apartments as well. What I want to say about transport is not to repeat what Steve said very, very clearly. It is really to take issue with the questioner that it was really absolutely the wrong question. I've heard it asked over and over again, is that why can't we have A instead of B? And Steve did say it. Actually, what the north of England needs after 50 years plus of lack of investment in our infrastructure, we need high speed too. We need Northern Powerhouse Rail. We need a new road link between Sheffield and Manchester. We need improved rail links between Newcastle and Leeds. We need electrification of Selby to Hull. We need all of that, and we shouldn't be put in a position of saying, oh, we'll have one instead of the other. As a north of England, it's part of the point of having a single voice for the north of England. We need to say we have been deprived of that for too long. Over the next 10, 15, 20 years, because that's how long it will take to do that. We want all of that. We should have all of that, and all of that is affordable.
Judith, trump that.
Yeah, so Susan, very struck with your comments, and when we started looking at city centres a couple of decades ago, really, I guess, starting to anticipate. First of all, you make living in the city centre an attractive proposition for a range of different people. But in Leeds, we have always seen that the success of that policy would be when the demand for family housing comes on the back of it. And what we actually have done in Leeds is actually anticipate that if you build family housing, you will need school places. So we've built a brand new secondary school right in the centre of Leeds, right at the very heart, just 3 minutes walk away from Leeds City Station. And we're bringing a primary school in as well. And I'm very pleased to say family housing is starting to come out of the ground. And I think we ought to listen to young people. We've heard a lot about young people, and I think they're looking for a whole different lifestyle. So we talk about the South Bank in Leeds as the largest regeneration project, certainly in the country, probably even beyond. And actually looking at the Northern European model, where young people actually are not applying for driving licenses, for example. They cannot afford their rents or their mortgages and to run a car as well. So, how can we actually construct communities where they can actually stay in the area? So move in post-university, post-school, post-training, and then progress to family housing within the area. But we have to think of the infrastructure needs that have to go with that, whether it's social infrastructure like schools, health facilities, or facilities around walking, cycling, and all of those aspects. But the other thing I would say about housing, and I would say this, and I'm sure other local authority members would, that we are facing a housing crisis in this country that cannot be addressed just by the private sector alone, important as that contribution is. And we want, as local authorities, to step up to the plate to provide council housing again and make sure that we have the ability to borrow the money. It is an income stream, housing, and we can actually step in and assist. So, Andrew, I don't want to miss you out at the back. We've had a lot of talks about transport for the North. It's a very different picture. Transport for London is one transport authority. I think Rich will correct me, but I think Transport for the North is 19 separate transport authorities coming together. And actually, the progress we've made in achieving that, those 19 coming together, speaking with one voice, signing off a plan for the North and recognising that we've all got to prioritise, is actually a massive step forward. And actually, do you know what? I bet if I could just say this, if I'm allowed to, I don't think Chris Grayling would agree that we're not getting our act together and talking about the East-West links. And he has, I understand, given an instruction that if he talks about Crossrail in London, if his officials talk about that, they also at the same time have to talk about east-west connectivity in the North. I think we are getting our act together. We are making our voice heard, but we can't do it on our own through Transport for North. We need the business community, please, to step up to the plate. As Steve said, when we had the summit in Leeds last summer, the real force of it was, the local authorities and the business community coming together with one voice and just saying, this is not good enough. We need the investment. And we need it now, and it's not just for passengers; it's for freight as well. And if you talk to manufacturers around the North, the fact that it takes something like 9 hours to get from Liverpool to Drax Power Station, 9 hours by train. I mean, come on, let's wake up and speak with one voice.
Judith, thank you very much indeed. Again, lots of people are nodding as you speak. We had one response to the question about incentives. Let me just put this in another context. The Republic of Ireland is able to vary all of its taxes. Northern Ireland is going for a Brexit deal that will allow it to vary taxes. Scotland already has tax varying powers. Ewan's asking the question, should there be some kind of fiscal flexibility for the North? John Mothersole said, yes, but not if it's at the expense of a proper policy for the North in government. Other members of the panel, have you got a view?
Well, I think two things. First of all, that we do need more fiscal devolution. There needs to be more localisation, and with fiscal devolution, that means there's got to be flexibility to change the system. I think there are areas where there needs to be public sector investment, housing and infrastructure, I think are relevant areas. But I always go back to the Manchester Independent Economic Review published in 2009 and what that said about basically subsidy to business and effectively said that if any business needs a subsidy to be in Manchester, you don't need that business. And I think it's very clear. You want businesses that come because the business case stacks up that this is the right place for our business to thrive and to grow. And a few quid on top as an incentive is at best always marginal anyway. If it's substantial, then the same business that once they've spent up that incentive will look, where next for an incentive can we move our business to?
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the panel before we get to the last question?
You did a slight shift in your response there because I think the incentives is one thing. I think powers is a completely different thing. And I think we've always all been arguing in favour of the powers. So in the face of the opportunity, sometimes you have to take a long-term position. You can deal with it in the moment rather than either have a long delay in the process or indeed be at the behest of a body over which you've got no control.
It's powers to raise capital rather than to discount tax
rates. It's anything. I mean, we argued for a while about powers over business rates. So not to raise it, but to recycle it and to get the uplift. That's now becoming neutralised now because business rate localisation is going to have to be fiscally neutral with the provision of public services. So in many respects, the opportunity to drive economic growth through that has now been sort of levelled out. Let's put it that way, because I'm apolitical on these points.
Deborah?
Yeah, just an observation, I suppose, about fiscal devolution. And we see, particularly in the world of housing and infrastructure funding, where we have a national bidding process into central government. And And so sometimes when there's not enough resource to go around, they get ranked in terms of greatest return on investment. And that can favour parts of the country where viability is stronger, and actually they're nearer the market. So there's something about maybe having a regional allocation of some of those funds, so locally we can determine those schemes that are more important rather than a national assessment of some of those forms of funding.
Great. We've got 2 minutes left, and I wanted to just ask the panel the final question about promoting the North on the one hand and representing the North in the Brexit discussions and other things as we go forward. In your views, panellists, very quick answers. Do we need to do something else to promote the North better internationally, and if so, what? And how would you like to see the North represented in Brexit discussions? But very short answers. You're going to go first, Deborah.
I think we need to learn to be less modest and show off our assets internationally. And be proud of the things that we just take for granted, which are really endearing and attractive places to live. On the second question, which has just gone out of my mind entirely.
Representing the North.
Yeah, it represents the North. Why would we not have a committee that, as business leaders, political leaders, third sector, who help negotiate and have some powers and have some real influence in Whitehall?
John.
I think we need to up our game promoting the North to the country. I'm less bothered internationally. Richard and I were on a trade trip to China a couple of years ago, and the Chinese have got no problem either knowing where the North is or being interested in it. So I think it's more of an issue nationally. Brexit, I think Steve's right. The risk for the North is it gets overlooked in all this, and we end up with a Brexit settlement that sorts out financial services. And we've got to make sure that we are around a table, whether it's a negotiating table or the table that forms the negotiating stance. We need to be somewhere there to counterbalance.
Thank you very much. Pat.
On Brexit, I think we do need a strong voice. I think that needs to be a collective voice, and I think there's already plans to bring leaders and business together as part of discussions at the Great North Exhibition, which will be in Newcastle and Gateshead later on this year.
And we're all invited?
All invited.
Yep.
It's a showcase for the North. The Rough Guide said it's the place to go in the world this year. So I think that part of that will be about promoting the North across the country, because it's a showcase of innovation, what the North can do, what we've achieved in the past, but more importantly, where we're going in the future. And Newcastle Gateshead's the means of promoting that, but for the whole of the North. And I hope everybody comes to visit.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Write to Pat if you want tickets. Steve?
Forget New York, Newcastle now, isn't it? That's the epicentre. So we're certainly going to attend. I find it quite difficult to talk about what the North actually means to people and how we'd brand that, because I'm having difficulty in my own area called the Liverpool City region in convincing a part of Cheshire, Halton, that they're now part of a Liverpool City region. So it's about identity, and I think we should use the really strong brands that we have in Leeds and Newcastle and Manchester and Liverpool as part of the identity of what the North means. And the second part about
Brexit.
whether we should have a common voice. I'm not certain who that is and what sector that person needs to come from, or whether it's more than one person who represents the North. But we have to have a voice around the Brexit table, otherwise we'll be left behind. And just one statistic, that if Chris Grayling was here, he'd try to poo-poo. For every pound that we get in transport infrastructure, the South gets 6, right? He's arguing that it's not quite that ratio, but even if it was half that bad, we're only getting a fraction of what we should be getting. The North will be left behind even further if we don't sit around that table with a strong voice.
Thank you very much. Judith.
Yeah, I think we're all making the case for a strong northern voice, cross-sector, at the Brexit table, and I think I'm really heartened to get that response back from everyone here. So I think we need to work together how actually we can be the most effective. And just thinking about the power of students within the country, I think we often forget. A university like Leeds, if you think about the students who've come from all over the world to study in our universities, we should be making far more of their connections when we go out, all over to actually help us, because they will tell you they spent the best years of their life in our great universities, and they very often do want to pay back. So let's work together to really build up those networks.
Thank you very much, Judith. Sir Richard.
I think we should have a voice at the Brexit table, but given what happened in the referendum, we probably ought to spend a bit of time deciding also what it is we would say as the North of England at the Brexit table. And in reality, there is yet to be a real debate in England, in particular, about what Brexit is all about. And we're a year into the exit process now, and we still haven't done that. And it's pretty urgent. And I have to say, national politicians and government in particular appear to be avoiding having that debate, even though they're supposed to be negotiating exit. In terms of selling ourselves, it's similar territory. That we're in the process of establishing, I hope, a Northern Trade and Investment Board to really to start sharing with the Department of International Trade how we sell the North internationally, because I think that's really what we need to do. We need to have more control of that, what the product is and what the message is, rather than, again, something being determined in Whitehall.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Richard. In a moment, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to thank our superb panel. But just before I do that, Richard, is there anything else you want to say to close the event?
Well, so, I want to thank our panel for coming and taking part in this. Thank you all for attending. Almost 4 years ago now, Northern Powerhouse as a phrase appeared on the scene. It was supposed to be an electoral gimmick from George Osborne. George Osborne, no longer a practising, no longer an elected politician anyway. And now, of course, the editor of the London Evening Standard, but still chairing the Northern Powerhouse partnership. So it seems to have lasted a bit more than the average gimmick. I think from the panel today, I think we're demonstrating that Northern Powerhouse is something that has real substance and is something that we can use as a device to promote and build the North of England in the long term. So that's the direction we're going in. That's why we continue to work together on this agenda. And underlying that is that we will not allow anymore the North of England to be ignored by that remote, out-of-touch Westminster Parliament.
Right, so Richard Leese, Councillor Judith Blake, Metro Mayor Steve Rotherham, Pat Ritchie, John Mothersole and Deborah McLaughlin, thank you very much.